I'm really honored to be with you today and to speak about the prospects for a fourth special session devoted to disarmament. Some of what I will say will touch on many of the excellent presentations that you've heard throughout the day, not particularly as a summary, but just as a way of underscoring some of the ideas that have been brought forth in this splendid conference. As many have noted, these are particularly dismal times for those of us seeking nuclear and general disarmament. As you may know, the Bulletin of the atomic scientist Doomsday Clock is set at 100 seconds to midnight. Over the past 2 decades, major nuclear powers have abrogated arms control treaties and agreements. In 2019, the United States and Russia withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that banned a class of weapons in Europe. And a year later, they also withdrew from the Open Skies Treaty that provided a means for verifying weapons treaty implementation. We have witnessed the unraveling of the nuclear nonproliferation regime, exemplified by the failure of the NPT review conference last month, and by increased nuclear weapons production in nearly all of the nuclear weapons states. Russia is threatening nuclear weapons use to prevent increased NATO challenges to Russia's conventional war in Ukraine. And in recent months, we've even seen Sweden reverse its nuclear weapons policy to embrace their use as it seeks entry into NATO. Clearly, the world is at a low point in nuclear weapons restraint. And with ongoing wars, most notably in Ukraine, states are building up conventional weapons forces as well, the very opposite of what we seek under the United Nations pledge of general and complete disarmament. So given these trends, what are the prospects for success of a special session of the UN General Assembly on complete disarmament? Let me offer some reasons for hope, if not a precise pathway to move forward. Some of these reasons for hope have been mentioned by several during this conference, so I just want to highlight 4 particular reasons. First, the conflict in Ukraine illustrates once again that the line that some seek to draw between nuclear and conventional weapons in war is in fact quite blurred. Russia has been able to invade a sovereign country with conventional weapons while deterring direct NATO confrontation by threatening to use nuclear weapons. Such entanglement of these weapons systems starkly reveals to a broad public the relationship between nuclear and conventional weapons. It makes clear that nuclear and general disarmament must go hand in hand. Second, the 2021 Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons holds the promise of becoming an effective instrument of nuclear disarmament, and countries in the global South, along with non-governmental organizations well represented here today, and with middle powers such as Austria, Mexico, and Norway, and most notably countries in the global South, deserve the credit for its success. The first review conference last June demonstrated the power of the coalition of 66 states that have now ratified the treaty, along with civil society organizations when they work together in the framework of the UN. Although the treaty has not gained favor with the nuclear weapon states or their allies, it provides support to the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty goals of nuclear and general disarmament and adds weight to the norm that nuclear weapons have no place in our global society. A third related reason for hope is that countries of the global South have welcomed an approach to weapons disarmament based on humanitarian needs to protect civilians and provide for human security as articulated in the TPNW and in the 1997 Mine Ban Treaty that prohibits anti-personnel mines. It is countries in the global South as well that have instituted nuclear weapons-free zones to protect themselves as much as possible from the horrors of nuclear war. These 5 zones, I don't need to remind you, encompass Latin America and the Caribbean in the 1967 Treaty of Tlatelolco, the South Pacific in the 1985 Treaty of Rarotonga, Southeast Asia with the 1995 Treaty of Bangkok, Africa with the 1996 Treaty of Pelindaba, and Central Asia with the 2006 Treaty on the Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone of Central Asia. These regions have led the way on nuclear disarmament and call on the nuclear states of the global North to follow their example. Countries in the global South also understand the high costs of maintaining conventional military forces and have sought to limit them. In the aftermath of violent conflicts, many acknowledge the trade-offs between expenditures for civilian welfare and spending for military forces, and choose economic and social development rather than weapons purchases to bring prosperity and security to their citizens. Fourth, the United States, the country with the largest and most expensive and extensive military in the world, must learn from the example of the Global South if it is to thrive. In fact, some of us in the United States see how growing military expenditures are threatening the very fabric of American society. The US government has reduced its support in recent decades for public education, healthcare, and environmental protection, even while increasing military budgets. The emphasis on raising military spending shortchanges other programs in the federal budget, including those for infrastructure that supports public health and renewable energy, for family and childcare, and for institutions of learning. Such spending patterns tend to disadvantage the already disadvantaged and contribute to disaffection and political polarization. These trends, in turn, are threatening the democratic norms of American society. This crisis of democracy is creating a new humility among some leaders and citizens in the United States, leading to renewed questions about the imbalance between military and social spending. I take heart, even in these most difficult times, in the prospect that public reaction is bringing leaders to their senses as we take stock of these long-term developments in the United States. These four trends, then, I suggest, set the stage for a special session and UN action on general disarmament, a new appreciation for the entangled relationship between nuclear and conventional warfare. Second, the success of the TPNW with its call for a nuclear weapons ban. Third, leadership by the Global South on nuclear disarmament and reduction of conventional weapons expenditures. And fourth, in the United States, a growing recognition that rising military expenditures rob public spending on social infrastructure that provides for human security. But even if I am right about the prospects for change in how we think about disarmament, when can the international community make good on the 1946 UN promise to disarm? The current war in Ukraine will end sometime, in a month, in a year, or in several years. When it does, the world will bear witness once again to the senseless and absolute destruction of a vibrant and prosperous society. Once again, national leaders, as they did after World War II, will assert the need for general disarmament and the abolition of war. But we cannot leave this important work to political leaders alone. It is civilians who are targeted in so-called modern wars and who suffer the gravest consequences, who have a greater say in nuclear and military decisions than they have in the past. Finally, then, hope rests in the persistent and courageous actions of citizens, peoples, and leaders of the Global South, several of whom we've heard from today, of global civil society organizations partnering with middle powers, as we've also heard from today, and of citizens in the global North. The recent passing of Mikhail Gorbachev reminds us of a time when ending the Cold War was unthinkable, when the idea of abolishing nuclear weapons was unthinkable. Yet it was mass movements of citizens in Europe and the United States, and indeed around the world, who gave the Soviet leader an opening to propose the unthinkable. We cannot recreate the past, but perhaps we can use this time of peril to inspire many more to demand an end to the instruments of war, to demand the unthinkable. Of course, there's a special role for those at this conference who already understand the trade-offs between military spending and human security, who resolve conflicts through negotiation rather than armed conflict and war, and who are already working for a world free of military weapons. But in the end, we will need a whole society approach, an approach that begins with a fourth special session of the UN General Assembly on general and complete disarmament.